Victoria stepped into the chapel wearing Evelyn's grandmother's veil. Not a similar one. Not a reproduction. The actual veil, hand-stitched with seed pearls, folded in tissue paper for 60 years, kept in a cedar box in Evelyn's closet, and now wrapped around her sister's head like it had always belonged there. Evelyn sat in the second row and didn't move. She didn't gasp, didn't stand, didn't cause the scene everyone in that room was probably half expecting from the woman whose wedding this was supposed to be. She just watched her sister float down the aisle toward the man who had been Evelyn's fiancé 3 months ago, wearing Evelyn's heirloom, in Evelyn's venue, at the wedding Evelyn had spent 14 months planning, and she breathed. Because that was what Evelyn Whitmore did. She breathed, and she endured, and she kept her face perfectly composed while everything she had built got handed to someone else. If you've ever sat in a room full of people who expected you to fall apart and refused to give them the satisfaction, you know exactly how she felt in that moment. You know the specific kind of strength it takes to stay seated when every instinct in your body is screaming at you to walk out, to make a sound, to remind the room that you exist. If that was you sitting in that second row, what would you have done? Before we go further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it, because what happens next in that chapel will change everything. The chapel smelled like white roses and money. That was the thing Evelyn kept noticing, the smell. She had chosen those roses herself. White garden roses with a slight blush at the center, ordered from a florist in Connecticut who charged 3 times the going rate because the blooms lasted longer and held their shape under warm lighting. She'd spent 40 minutes on the phone with the woman discussing stem length. Now they lined the aisle in front of Victoria. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap and kept her eyes forward. She had arrived early. That had probably been a mistake. She understood that now. But when her mother called 2 nights ago and said, "Evelyn, I think you should come for the family," she hadn't known how to say no in a way that wouldn't become its own kind of disaster. Margaret Whitmore had a talent for turning other people's refusals into evidence of their selfishness. So Evelyn had come. She had put on a dove-gray dress, not black, which would be too pointed, not white, which would be lunatic territory. And she had driven herself to the Whitmore family estate in Westchester and taken a seat in the second row like a woman attending someone else's wedding, which she was, technically. She noticed the centerpieces had been modified. The original design had included trailing greenery and small clusters of eucalyptus, which Evelyn had specifically selected because her grandmother used to grow it in her garden in Savannah. Someone had swapped it out for baby's breath. Budget cut, probably. Or Victoria had simply wanted to change it and hadn't thought or cared about why Evelyn had chosen it in the first place. The organ started playing. Evelyn recognized the processional. She had selected that too. She had spent one entire Sunday afternoon in April going through recordings with a music coordinator, trying to find something that felt meaningful without being generic. They had settled on a classical arrangement that walked the line between joyful and dignified. She remembered feeling proud of that choice. She remembered calling Nathaniel afterward and playing him a recording through the phone and asking if he loved it. He had said yes. He had said it was perfect. She hadn't talked to him since the message. She hadn't responded, hadn't called, hadn't done anything except read it once, set her phone face down on the kitchen counter, and then spent the next 4 hours sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub. Because it was the only room in her apartment where she was certain no one could see her through a window. The message had been 12 sentences long. The most important one was the 7th. "I think I've been in love with Victoria for longer than I realized, and I don't know how to be with you knowing that." He hadn't apologized in the message. Not once. He had explained, he had reflected, he had used the phrase complicated feelings 3 times, but he hadn't apologized. Evelyn had noticed that. She had noticed it the way you notice a missing step on a staircase. Not intellectually, not right away, but in your body, a sudden lurch where solid ground should have been. The doors at the back of the chapel opened. Victoria appeared. She was beautiful. That was the honest truth, and Evelyn had always been honest. It was both her greatest strength and the quality that had cost her the most over the years. Victoria was 29 to Evelyn's 34. with the kind of effortless prettiness that had always made family photographs complicated. She had their mother's bone structure and their father's eyes, and the particular quality of a woman who had never once in her life believed she might be ordinary. But the veil. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She had not known about the veil. She had assumed that her mother would have at least drawn a line there. The venue, fine, the arrangements, fine, the flowers, and the music, and the caterer that Evelyn had spent months researching, fine. Those were materials. Those could be explained away, transferred, justified with accounting language and logistical convenience. But the veil had been in Evelyn's possession since her grandmother's funeral 6 years ago. Eleanor Whitmore had pressed Evelyn's hands around the cedar box herself and said, "This is for when your time comes, sweetheart. Don't let your mother talk you out of wearing it." Evelyn had kept it in her closet. She had brought it out once, after Nathaniel proposed, and held it up in front of her bathroom mirror with tears she wasn't expecting. She had no idea how Victoria had gotten it. She had several theories, and all of them involved her mother. The ceremony was starting now, the officiant stepping forward with that practiced solemnity that wedding officiants learned in whatever training program certified them to preside over the most significant days of people's lives. He was saying words about commitment and partnership and the sacred nature of the promises being exchanged. Evelyn looked at Nathaniel for the first time. He was handsome, still. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Nathaniel Graves had the kind of looks that photographs well. Square jaw, dark hair going slightly silver at the temples at 38, in a way that read as distinguished rather than aging. He was wearing a navy suit she didn't recognize, which meant he'd bought a new one for this. Standing beside him was Alexander Blackwood. She hadn't known Alexander would be the best man. She hadn't known much about the particulars of this wedding, having gone out of her way not to know. But when she walked in and saw him standing there at the altar, something in her chest had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but she'd felt it. Alexander Blackwood was not a man you looked at casually. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the polished kind of height that expensive shoes manufactured, but the kind of height that occupied space differently. He was 42, lean in a way that suggested discipline rather than effort, and he had a stillness about him that Evelyn had noticed years ago, the first time they met at a charity fundraiser. Most powerful men performed their power. They talked loudly and gestured broadly and made sure you understood what they were, because if you understood what they were, then you understood that you should be paying attention to them. Alexander never did any of that. He stood at the altar now with his hands clasped in front of him and his expression completely neutral, and Evelyn couldn't decide whether he'd agreed to be here because he genuinely supported Nathaniel or because he was the kind of man who played the long game and kept his enemies close enough to touch. She didn't know him well enough to be sure. They'd spoken perhaps a dozen times over 4 years, always at events connected to the Whitmore Charitable Foundation, fundraisers, galas, the occasional benefit dinner that drew New York's complicated overlap of old money and new influence. He donated generously. He asked intelligent questions about the work. He had once spent 20 minutes talking to her about a children's literacy program she'd been trying to expand into 3 underserved districts, and she remembered being surprised by how specifically he engaged with the details, how he wasn't just performing interest but actually listening. He had never once mentioned the other things people said about him, and people said plenty. Evelyn wasn't naive. She understood what Alexander Blackwood was, in the broad sense. New York's social world was full of men whose money came from places that didn't bear too close an examination, but Alexander occupied a different category, the kind of category that people mentioned in lowered voices, the kind where the word organization carried a specific weight. She had decided, somewhere in the course of knowing him, that his private business was not her business, and that the man she'd actually spoken to was not a fiction, even if he was an incomplete picture. The officiant was asking the couple to face each other now. Victoria was holding Nathaniel's hands. Nathaniel was looking at her with an expression that Evelyn studied for a moment, and then looked away from, because the expression was genuine, and that was somehow the worst part of this entire situation. Worse than the veil, worse than the roses, worse than sitting in the second row of her own venue. The fact that it was real. That he had actually fallen in love with her sister. That there was no villain's calculation underneath it, no conscious cruelty, just a man who had wanted one thing and then wanted something else, and had handled the transition with spectacular cowardice. If anyone present knows of any reason these two should not be joined in marriage, the officiant said, and then paused in the way officiants did. The performative pause, the ceremonial beat that was supposed to be empty. Please speak now or forever hold your peace. Alexander Blackwood stepped forward. The sound his shoes made on the marble was very quiet. The chapel itself was absolutely silent. I do, he said. The word landed in the room like something thrown through glass. Nathaniel turned. His expression went through several things very quickly. Confusion, irritation, and then something harder to name, something that looked like a man watching a calculation fail. Alexander, he started. I'm going to need a few minutes, Alexander said. His voice was even, conversational almost, as if he were asking to borrow something at a dinner party. And then everyone here is going to want to sit down. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He produced a folded document. Evelyn stopped breathing. 3 months ago, Alexander said, while Miss Whitmore was handling the cancellation of her own wedding, paying deposits back, notifying vendors, managing the legal dissolution of contracts she had personally signed, her former fiancé was quietly redirecting several of those contracts to this ceremony. The chapel made a sound. Not words. A sound. The collective intake and shift of 60 people who had just realized they were not at the wedding they thought they were at. The venue contract, Alexander continued, was transferred using a digital authorization signed with Miss Whitmore's name. The signature was not hers. He unfolded the document. The catering agreement, the floristry order, the music coordinator's deposit, all of it transferred, all of it paid for, originally, with funds from the Whitmore Charitable Foundation's discretionary account, under paperwork that indicated the expenses were for foundation events. Margaret Whitmore made a sound from the front row, a sharp, horrified sound, like a woman who had just realized how much she hadn't known. Nathaniel was already talking. This is absurd. You have no right. The veil, Alexander said. He looked directly at Evelyn when he said it. She felt the look land somewhere specific, not soft, not pitying, direct, acknowledging. The veil was removed from Miss Whitmore's apartment, he said, 3 weeks ago, by someone with a key. The security footage from her building is part of what's been filed with the district attorney's office this morning. Victoria turned to look at Nathaniel. The expression on her face was not the expression of a woman who knew. It was the expression of a woman who was starting to understand that she hadn't. Nathaniel grabbed her hand. Victoria, listen to me. Don't, Victoria said, quietly. Almost too quietly for the room to hear, but the room heard it. Alexander folded the document again and placed it back in his jacket with the same unhurried calm he'd had stepping forward. He looked at Evelyn again. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in it. Not ownership, not triumphalism, not the gloating quality of a man who has won something. Just a kind of steadiness. A question. What do you want to do with this? Evelyn stood up. She hadn't planned to. Her body simply decided. She stood up from the second row of a wedding that had been built on her suffering, in the middle of a room full of people who had watched her stay quiet for 3 months and decided that meant she was fine. And she looked at Nathaniel Graves for the first time since the day he disappeared, and she said, I want the veil back. Not shouted, not performed. She said it the way you say something true, flat and clear and without apology. Nathaniel stared at her. Just the veil, she said. We can deal with everything else later, but right now I want my grandmother's veil. Victoria was already reaching up. Her hands were shaking as she unclipped it. Evelyn could see the trembling from across the room, but she unclipped it carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else. And she walked the 4 steps down the aisle to where Evelyn was standing and held it out. Evelyn took it. She held it against her chest with both hands. Around her, the chapel was coming apart at the seams. Her father was on his feet. Nathaniel was still talking. She could hear his voice, rising, insisting, trying to reassemble a narrative that had already collapsed. Her mother was crying in the front row with both hands pressed to her mouth. Alexander was standing at the altar watching Evelyn, not moving, not speaking, not inserting himself, just there. She looked at him across the chapel, this man she half knew, this man who had just burned down her ex-fiancé's wedding in a marble room full of New York's finest people. And she thought, for the first time in 3 months, that she might actually survive this. Not well. Not cleanly. Not without the weeks of chaos and legal battles and family conversations that were now absolutely inevitable, but survive it. She clutched her grandmother's veil and breathed. Behind her, somewhere near the doors, someone started crying, a quiet, messy sound that she couldn't quite identify. And the roses she had chosen, white and perfect and completely wasted on this particular day, kept their shape under the warm chapel light exactly as she'd been promised they would. The chapel didn't empty the way rooms usually empty after a ceremony. It fractured. People didn't file out in quiet procession. They broke into clusters, the way people do when something has gone wrong badly enough that no one knows what the appropriate response is. There was movement near the doors. There was a raised voice somewhere by the floral arrangements. There was the specific kind of social chaos that happens when 60 carefully dressed people realize they've just witnessed something that will be the most interesting thing they tell anyone for the next several years, and they're not quite sure whether to leave or stay and see what happens next. Evelyn was still standing in the aisle. She had the veil. That was the only thing she was certain of at this particular moment. The weight of it in her hands, the slight texture of the seed pearls against her palms, the smell of cedar that still clung to it even after everything. She was holding it the way you hold something you were afraid you'd lost, which is to say too tightly, with hands that hadn't gotten the message yet that the crisis was over. Except it wasn't over. It was in fact extremely not over. Her father reached her first. Gerald Whitmore was 67 years old and had spent most of those years being the kind of man who moved slowly through rooms because he'd learned long ago that slow movement read as authority. He was not moving slowly now. He crossed the distance from the front row with a purposefulness that Evelyn hadn't seen from him in years, and he put both hands on her shoulders and looked at her face like he was checking for damage. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm fine," she said, which was not entirely true, but was the most efficient answer. "Evelyn, Dad," she pulled back gently. "I'm fine. I'm not going to fall apart in the middle of this, okay? That's not what's happening." He searched her face. His jaw was working, that thing he did when he was upset and trying to figure out whether the upset was going to turn into something productive or just sit in his chest and ferment. He had never been a man who handled confrontation well. He was a man who handled the aftermath of confrontation, who came in after the wreckage and said reasonable things in a reasonable voice and helped people agree on what had actually happened. He'd been doing it his entire marriage. He'd been doing it with his daughters, their entire lives. "I didn't know," he said, "about any of this. Evelyn, I want you to understand that I know you didn't, Dad. Your mother, I know." He stopped. He looked like a man who'd been building toward something and had just found out the building had been completed without him. "We're going to fix this," he said, finally. "I know we are," she said, "but not right now. Right now, I need you to go find out if Nathaniel is still in this building, because if he is, I need to know where he is." Her father nodded once, the kind of nod that meant he was grateful to have a task, and moved off. Evelyn turned around. Nathaniel was still in the building. He was 20 feet away, near the side exit, and he was having what appeared to be an extremely intense conversation with two men she didn't recognize. Broad-shouldered, quiet-faced men in dark suits who were standing in a configuration that made it unclear whether Nathaniel was talking to them or being talked to. One of them had his hand on the door handle. The door was not open. Alexander was standing nearby, not close enough to be in the conversation, but close enough. He caught her eyes when she looked at him, and there was something in his expression that she couldn't fully decode. Not satisfaction, not amusement, not the triumphant quality she might have expected from a man who had just blown up a wedding. He looked like a man who had done what he came to do and was now waiting to see what came next. She walked toward him. Her heels were loud on the marble. Everything was loud in the aftermath of a silence that big. "You filed with the DA this morning," she said when she reached him. "Yes." "Without telling me?" "Yes." She held his gaze. "Why?" Alexander looked at her steadily. "Because if I had told you, you would have either tried to talk me out of it or tried to be involved in the decision, and the window for filing was narrow. I made a judgment call." "That wasn't your call to make." "I know." The directness of that stopped her. She'd expected deflection or justification or the kind of elaborate rationale that powerful men produced when they'd done something unilaterally and wanted credit for the outcome. She hadn't expected him to just agree. I know it wasn't, he said again, quieter. And I'll answer for that. But not today. She looked at him for another moment, then she looked over his shoulder toward Nathaniel. Is he going to try to run? No, Alexander said simply. She decided not to ask what that meant. The moment. Margaret Whitmore reached Evelyn. The temperature in the room shifted in a different way entirely. Her mother was 59 and had been beautiful her entire life, in a way that had shaped her understanding of how the world worked, which was to say, not particularly accurately. She had spent 30 years navigating New York society with the specific toolkit of a woman who believed that presentation solved most problems, and that problems which couldn't be solved by presentation should be managed quietly enough that they didn't become other people's business. This was not that kind of problem. Evelyn. Her mother's voice was compressed, tight, the voice she used when she was operating at maximum control. We need to talk privately. There's no private left, Mom. 60 people just watched Alexander Blackwood object at Nathaniel's wedding. I am aware, using my name, my documents, my money. Margaret's composure flickered. We don't know the full... Alexander had the documents. Evelyn's voice was very flat. He had copies of the digital signatures. He had the transfer records. He had security footage from my building. She paused. Do you want to tell me what he doesn't have? Her mother looked away. It was a small thing, a quarter turn of the head, the chin going up slightly. But Evelyn had been reading her mother's silences for 34 years, and she knew what that particular movement meant. You knew about some of it, Evelyn said. Evelyn, not the fraud, not the foundation money. She watched her mother's face. But you knew about the venue. You knew he was using the same arrangements. I thought... Margaret stopped, started again. The deposits were already paid. The contracts were already in place. It seemed wasteful to simply let them. It seemed wasteful. Evelyn repeated the words very carefully, the way you repeat something back to confirm you've heard it correctly, and not because you need clarification. The deposits on my canceled wedding, the venue where I was supposed to get married. You thought the practical thing was to let Nathaniel use it. Victoria needed somewhere to have the ceremony. Victoria needed... Evelyn stopped herself. She closed her eyes for half a second. She breathed. Did you know about the veil, Mom? The silence was long enough to be its own answer. I told her it was in your closet, Margaret said. I didn't tell her to take it. I assumed she would ask you. She didn't ask me. I know that now. You assumed... Evelyn's voice was very quiet now, which was actually more dangerous than if she'd raised it. You assumed that your younger daughter, who had just run off with my fiancé, would ask my permission before taking my grandmother's veil. That's what you assumed. Margaret Whitmore, who had handled every social crisis of her adult life with perfect composure, pressed her lips together and looked down at her hands. I told myself you were stronger than this, she said, that you could handle it, that you didn't need, that I could handle it. Something moved across Evelyn's face, not anger exactly, something underneath anger, the thing that anger is built on top of. You've been saying that my whole life, Mom, every time you needed me to be quiet so you could manage appearances. Evelyn can handle it. Evelyn is strong. Evelyn will be fine. She exhaled. Did it ever occur to you that making me strong enough to handle it was how you got me to handle it alone? Her mother didn't answer. Across the room, her father was coming back with the specific expression of a man who had located something he wished he hadn't. He's trying to leave, her father said. Low, tight. Nathaniel. He's been on his phone for the last 10 minutes, and he's trying to get one of Alexander's men to move away from the door. They won't, Evelyn said. Gerald frowned. How can you be... They won't, she said again. Her father looked at Alexander, who was now standing near the altar, speaking quietly with a woman Evelyn didn't recognize. Late 30s, sharp-faced, wearing a gray blazer that didn't match anything else in the room, and holding a leather folder like a person whose job involved leather folders and moving quickly. Who is she? Gerald asked. I don't know. Evelyn, how deeply is Alexander Blackwood involved in... Dad, she touched his arm. One thing at a time. The thing that happened next happened fast. Nathaniel broke away from the two men near the exit. Not ran, he was too calculating for that, but moved with a decisive speed toward the center of the room, toward Evelyn, which was the last direction anyone expected him to go. He was across the space between them in seconds, and he stopped close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the specific quality of a man who had decided that offense was his only remaining option. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Alone." "No," she said. "Evelyn, this is what Alexander is doing, what he's claiming. You need to hear my side of—" "I don't. I can explain the transfers. The deposits were going to be lost anyway. The venue was already booked. It was a logistical—" "Nathaniel." Her voice cut clean through his. "Stop." He stopped. "You forged my signature," she said, "on legal documents. You used my family's charitable foundation as a personal expense account. You took my grandmother's veil." She looked at him without flinching. "Which part of that would you like to explain first?" His face changed. She watched it change, watched the calculation shift beneath the surface, the particular reorganization of a man who has been running one strategy and is switching to another. He'd been going for conciliation. Now he was going somewhere harder. "You set this up," he said. "You and Blackwood. You've been— How long have you been working with him on this, Evelyn? Because this doesn't happen in 3 months. This kind of documentation, The documentation exists because you committed fraud," she said, "not because I orchestrated anything. You walked in here today knowing what was going to happen. I walked in here today because my mother asked me to, and because I apparently still can't say no to that." She let that land. "The fact that Alexander decided to do what he did, I didn't know. I found out the same time everyone else did." His eyes narrowed. He didn't believe her. She could see that clearly. And then something complicated crossed his face, something that might have been, underneath everything else, a kind of shame. Not remorse exactly, shame. The specific shame of a man who has done something he can't rationalize any further. "I was going to pay it back," he said. "What?" "The foundation money. I have a deal closing in 6 weeks. The foundation would have been repaid before anyone—" "Stop talking," Evelyn said. "Evelyn, Nathaniel, I'm asking you to stop talking right now." He did. Behind him, Victoria had appeared at the edge of the room. She was standing with her arms crossed over her chest, the bridal gown slightly askew, her face showing the particular shock of a woman who is realizing that several things she understood about her own life are not accurate. She was looking at Nathaniel with an expression that was not yet fully formed. Not anger, not grief, not accusation. All of those things were coming, but right now it was something earlier. Rawer. The expression of someone standing at the edge of a thing they don't yet know the size of. Alexander crossed the room. He didn't hurry. He moved the way he always moved, with that particular economy of motion that Evelyn had noticed years ago, the quality of a man who understood that rushing communicated weakness. He stopped beside Evelyn and looked at Nathaniel. "There are 2 men from the district attorney's office outside," he said. "They've been waiting since this morning. You have about 30 seconds to decide if you want to walk out to them or if you want them to come in." Nathaniel's face went the color of old paper. "You can't—" "Fraud," Alexander said, ticking items off with a patience that was more unsettling than any display of anger would have been. "Document forgery, misappropriation of charitable funds, unauthorized entry." He paused. "That last one's for the veil. Might seem small compared to the rest, but people tend to find it resonant. I have lawyers." "I know you do." Alexander's voice was perfectly even. "Call them." Nathaniel looked at Evelyn. It was a strange look. The kind of look that might, in a different context, have read as pleading. Not pleading for forgiveness, he knew better than that, but something else. Pleading for her to understand something, or to acknowledge something, or possibly just to register that he understood. Now, at this exact moment, the specific magnitude of what he had done. She returned his gaze without expression. "Go," she said. He went. The room took another 20 minutes to properly clear. Victoria didn't leave right away. She sat in the front pew, the seat that had been arranged for the mother of the bride before the seating chart got complicated. And she sat there with her hands folded in her lap and her wedding dress spreading around her on the cushion, and she didn't cry, which Evelyn found more difficult to witness than tears would have been. Evelyn walked over. She sat down in the pew beside her sister, not close but not far, and didn't say anything for a moment. "I didn't know about the foundation money," Victoria said. "I know. Or the documents. I thought the venue transfer was, I thought Dad had arranged it. Or that I thought it was. She stopped. I should have asked. I should have asked you directly. Yes, Evelyn said. You should have. Victoria's hands tightened in her lap. That's it? That's all you're going to… What do you want me to say, Victoria? Evelyn's voice was tired, genuinely tired, not performed exhaustion. You want me to absolve you? I can't do that today. I don't have it in me today. I didn't know he was… You knew he was engaged to me when you fell in love with him. Evelyn kept her voice level. You knew that part. Whatever else you didn't know, you knew that. Victoria said nothing. The veil, Evelyn said. Did you know it was mine, grandmother's? Did Mom tell you what it was? A pause. She said it was a family heirloom, Victoria said. She said eventually you'd want someone in the family to use it. She said I would want someone in the family to use it. Evelyn, I'm sorry. Don't. Evelyn exhaled, not sharp, just tired. Don't do the apology today, not yet. You don't get to do the apology today, Victoria, because today I am still sitting in the building where my ex-fiancé just got arrested outside, wearing my grandmother's veil in a ceremony he paid for with my family's charitable donations. She paused. There are going to be days when we can start to repair this. This is not one of them. Victoria looked down. The room was nearly empty now. The caterers had appeared at some point and were standing near the reception area looking uncertain, because no one had told them what to do when the event they were catering ceased to be an event. The flowers kept being flowers. The light through the chapel windows kept being beautiful, indifferent to the wreckage beneath it. Gerald Whitmore appeared at the end of the pew. He looked at both his daughters, at Evelyn holding the folded veil, at Victoria in the dismantled wedding dress, and he sat down on the other side of Victoria without speaking. Margaret stood near the doors, alone, for the first time in Evelyn's memory, looking like a woman who didn't know what to do with her hands. Alexander came to stand near Evelyn. Not in the pew. He remained standing, a step back, which was its own kind of statement. She looked up at him. The woman with the folder, she said. Who is she? My legal counsel, he said. She was already here. Yes. Before the ceremony started. Yes. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You planned all of this. I planned the documentation, he said. I planned the filing. I didn't plan standing up during the vows. That was… He paused, and something shifted in his expression, brief and honest. That was a decision I made when I saw you sitting in the second row. She processed that. Why? He was quiet for a moment. The particular quality of a man choosing his words, not because he doesn't have them, but because he wants to get them right. Because you came, he said, when you didn't have to, when any reasonable person would have stayed home. You came because someone asked you to, and you walked in, and you sat down, and you weren't going to say anything. He met her eyes. And I've known you long enough to know that's not strength. That's what people do when they've been taught that their silence is the price of belonging somewhere. Evelyn didn't respond. She looked down at the veil in her hands. Somewhere outside there were voices, official voices, the kind that came with procedures and documentation and the particular mechanical grinding of consequences finally catching up to something. Nathaniel's lawyers were probably already on the phone. The investors connected to his personal business accounts were probably already seeing news alerts. The story was going to move through New York by nightfall, and it was going to move the way these stories moved, faster than you expected, with details that multiplied and sharpened as they traveled. And in the middle of all of it, something else was also beginning. Because Alexander's legal counsel had not simply filed fraud charges with the district attorney. Evelyn didn't know this yet. What she didn't know, what no one in the chapel except Alexander and the woman with the folder knew, was that the documentation they had filed was only the first layer. Beneath it, buried in 6 months of financial audits, communication intercepts, and carefully built evidentiary chains, was a second set of records that changed the nature of what Nathaniel had done. Not just fraud, not just document forgery. Nathaniel Graves had used Evelyn's family connections, specifically the Whitmore Foundation's relationships with 3 city council members and 1 state senator, to secure permits and quiet regulatory approvals for a development project that had been blocked twice for safety violations. He had done it before he proposed to her. He had done it knowing exactly what he was doing. The engagement had not been careless. The love had not been complicated. The whole thing, the relationship, the proposal, the 14 months of a planned future had been, at its foundation, a strategic arrangement that Evelyn had never been told she was part of. Alexander's legal counsel was already building the second case, and when Evelyn found out, when the full picture finally assembled itself in front of her, when she understood not just what had been taken, but why she had been chosen in the first place, there would be no more sitting quietly. There would be no more enduring. There would be no more allowing anyone to mistake her silence for peace. That moment was coming. And Nathaniel Graves, being processed by two men from the district attorney's office in the parking lot of the Whitmore family estate on what was supposed to be his wedding day, did not yet understand that the worst was still ahead. The folder landed on Evelyn's kitchen table at 9:17 the following morning. Not a metaphorical landing, an actual, physical, this-is-happening landing. Rachel Cho, Alexander's legal counsel, set it down with both hands and stepped back and said, "I need you to read this before I explain anything," and then stood near the window with her arms crossed and her expression arranged into the specific neutrality of a woman who had delivered bad news enough times to know that preamble made it worse. Evelyn was still in the clothes she'd slept in, which were not pajamas because she hadn't made it to that stage. She'd gotten home around midnight, sat on her couch, and the next thing she knew it was 7 a.m., and her neck hurt and someone was buzzing her intercom. She'd made coffee. She hadn't showered. She was sitting at her kitchen table in yesterday's gray dress with her grandmother's veil folded on the counter behind her like a presence. She opened the folder. The first page was a timeline. She recognized some of it. Dates she knew, events she remembered. The fundraiser where she and Nathaniel had met 3 years and 4 months ago. The first 6 months of the relationship. The proposal, which had happened at her family's home in the Hamptons on a Saturday afternoon in October, with her parents present, with the specific quality of a moment that had felt both personal and somehow staged, though she had told herself that staging and meaning were not mutually exclusive. She had told herself a lot of things. She kept reading. The second page was where the timeline started to include things she didn't know. 6 weeks before she met Nathaniel at the fundraiser, a development project he had been backing, a mixed-use residential tower on the west side of Manhattan, had been rejected for the second time by the city's Department of Buildings. Safety violations. Safety. Structural engineering concerns flagged by an independent assessment. The kind of rejection that didn't just delay a project, it threatened it fundamentally. She read that paragraph 3 times. Then she read the next one. Nathaniel's company had needed access to someone with relationships in the regulatory space, someone with legitimate standing, with clean social credibility, with connections to the kind of city and state officials who could quietly expedite a review process without it looking like influence. The Whitmore Foundation had those relationships. The Whitmore Foundation had been building those relationships for 11 years through charitable work, through community investment, through Evelyn's careful, unglamorous labor of actually showing up to things and doing the work and being the kind of person that officials returned calls to. She was halfway through the third page when she stopped. She put both hands flat on the table. "How long have you known this?" she said. Rachel didn't flinch. Alexander confirmed the full picture 4 days ago. 4 days. The initial indicators came together about 3 weeks ago. It took time to establish the evidentiary connections with enough certainty that 4 days, Evelyn said again. Not a question this time. Rachel was quiet. Evelyn looked back down at the folder. She made herself keep reading, because stopping felt like something she couldn't afford right now. The third page had communication records, excerpts from emails and text messages, the metadata stripped down to content and dates. Nathaniel, corresponding with a business partner named Conrad Speltz, 8 days before the charity fundraiser where he and Evelyn met. The excerpt was 6 lines long. She read it once. Then she read it again, because the first reading had produced a kind of white noise in her head that made it hard to hold the meaning. Whitmore Foundation. The daughter runs it day to day, not the parents. Evelyn. She's the one with the actual relationships. If this is going to work the way we need it to, it needs to come through her. Social introduction makes more sense than a direct approach. She'll be at the Alderman Gala next month. She closed the folder. She picked up her coffee mug, realized her hands weren't steady enough to be trusted with it, and set it back down. "He targeted me," she said. "Yes. Before we met. He identified me specifically, he found out where I would be, and he—" She stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing because finishing it would require her to say out loud that the 3 years she had understood as a relationship were something else entirely, and she was not ready to do that yet. And the fact that she wasn't ready was its own particular devastation because Evelyn Whitmore was a woman who dealt with things directly, and not being able to deal with this directly made her feel like a stranger in her own body. "The proposal," she said. "The permits. Walk me through what happened with the permits." Rachel moved to the table and sat down across from her. She opened her own copy of the folder. 14 months into your relationship, Rachel said, a city council member named Alan Prentice expedited a structural review for Nathaniel's development project. Prentice is on the board of advisors for the Whitmore Foundation. He's attended 4 foundation events in the past 2 years. You've met with him personally twice regarding the foundation's youth program expansion. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Prentice didn't do anything illegal, Rachel said quickly. Expediting a review is within his authority, but the review that came back was significantly more favorable than the 2 previous assessments. The structural concerns that had blocked the project twice were reclassified as addressable rather than prohibitive. She paused. The project broke ground 8 months ago. It's currently 40% complete. And Prentice doesn't appear to have known he was being used. He knows Nathaniel socially, through the foundation connection, and the request for expedited review came through normal channels. He had no reason to question it. Rachel met her eyes. The problem is that Nathaniel's communication records make clear that he understood exactly what the access was worth, and that access came directly from your relationship with him. Evelyn stood up. She walked to the window. Outside, her street was doing its normal morning things. Delivery trucks, a woman walking 2 dogs, a man in a suit moving fast with a coffee in each hand. All of it looked completely ordinary from up here, which struck her as an almost offensive quality for the world to have right now. He was going to leave me anyway, she said, after the project was approved. That was always the plan. We can't confirm intent with the documentation we have. He was going to leave me anyway, Evelyn said again, because she wasn't asking Rachel to confirm it. She was saying it out loud because it needed to exist in the room as a spoken thing, not just a thought that she could avoid examining if she kept it internal. She turned back from the window. Where is he now? Processed and released last night. His lawyers had him out within 4 hours. Rachel's voice was even. The DA's office has the initial filing, but they're still building the case. These things move slowly, I know. Evelyn came back to the table but didn't sit. She stood with her hands braced on the back of the chair. What does Alexander want to do? Rachel looked at her carefully. Alexander wants to know what you want to do. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Rachel closed her folder. He was explicit about that. This is your decision. What happens next is your decision. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Alexander. He picked up on the second ring. You should have told me 4 days ago, she said. Yes, he said. I should have. Why didn't you? A pause. Not evasive, considering. Because I wasn't sure how you'd respond, and I needed you to be at the wedding for the first filing to land correctly. Another pause, shorter. That was wrong. I made a calculation when I should have made a different call. I'm telling you that directly. She sat down in the chair. I need to talk to Nathaniel, she said. That's not a good idea right now. I didn't ask if it was a good idea. Silence. Evelyn, I have been managed through this entire situation, she said. By my mother. By you. By Nathaniel for 3.5 years. I understand that everyone believes they're making the right call, but I am done being the variable that other people account for in their planning. She kept her voice level with effort. I need to talk to him. Arrange it. The silence was longer this time. All right, Alexander said. She met Nathaniel at his office. Not his home, which felt too intimate. Not a neutral public location, which felt too theatrical. His office, because she wanted him on ground that felt like his, so that whatever she saw on his face would be authentic and not performed for witnesses. He was already there when she arrived. Standing near the window, which struck her as a thing they'd both done today, in completely different emotional registers. He looked like he hadn't slept. His suit was slightly wrong. Not rumpled. Nathaniel never allowed himself to be rumpled, But there was something off about the way it sat on him, the small visible signs of a night spent managing disaster. He looked at her when she came in. She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited to. "The Alderman Gala," she said, "8 days before we met. You knew I would be there." Something moved across his face. He was good at controlling his expression. She had admired that quality in him once, which now struck her as its own dark comedy. But he wasn't good enough for this. The movement was small, involuntary, a micro-adjustment around the eyes. "Evelyn, yes or no, Nathaniel?" He sat down behind his desk. The gesture had the quality of a man putting a physical object between himself and something he doesn't want to face directly. It was more complicated than yes or no. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Yes," he said. The room didn't change. The furniture stayed where it was. The light through his office windows kept doing what light did. Evelyn's hands stayed in her lap, and her face stayed the way she'd arranged it, and nothing in her physical presentation indicated that the word she'd just heard had landed like a structural collapse inside her chest. "The permits," she said. "The permits were—" He stopped. Reorganized. The project was being strangled by a review process that was— The original assessments were flawed, Evelyn. The structural concerns that got raised were addressable. I needed someone to look at the project without the bias that had built up in the system. The relationship with Prentice just— Was that the plan from the beginning? She said. One permit review? Or was I going to be useful for longer? He didn't answer. The proposal, she said. The engagement. Was keeping me invested how you made sure I kept maintaining the relationships? Kept bringing you to events? Kept introducing you as someone the Foundation trusted? His jaw tightened. It started as a strategy, he said. His voice was different now, stripped of something. That's the honest answer. I'm giving you the honest answer because you came here and you asked directly and I— He stopped. It started as a strategy, and then it became something else. Something else. I did love you, he said. That part was real. When? He blinked. What? When did it become real? Give me a timeline. She kept her voice flat. Because I'd like to know which parts of 3.5 years I'm supposed to hold on to and which parts were performance. His face went through something complicated. Pain, she thought, and then immediately wasn't sure whether she trusted her ability to read him anymore, which was its own particular horror. The realization that the entire database of understanding you'd built about a person over years might need to be audited from scratch. Victoria, she said. He looked at the desk. Was Victoria part of it? No. Fast. Too fast to be calculated. No, Victoria had nothing to do with— What happened with Victoria was— An accident? Evelyn's voice was quiet and very sharp. A complication, he said. And then, after a moment, yes, an accident. She looked at him. She thought about what it meant that he had walked into a calculated plan and somewhere in the execution of it had genuinely fallen in love with her sister, and she could not decide whether that was worse or better than the alternative, and she suspected that the fact that she could not decide was the thing that was going to take the longest to resolve. Did Victoria know any of it? She said. The original plan, the permits, any of it. No, he said. I kept it completely separate. She thought you fell in love with her, and she thought Evelyn stepped aside, and she thought the venue and the arrangements were— She thought everything was handled properly. Yes. Evelyn stood up. Okay, she said. Okay? He looked up. The word had apparently not been what he expected. I came here because I needed to hear you say it, she said. I needed to look at you while you said it. I'm done now. Evelyn, the legal situation, if you push this forward, if you go full prosecution, there are things that will come out that will damage people beyond just me. Prentice doesn't deserve— I know Prentice doesn't deserve it, she said. I'll work with the DA to manage what gets public carefully. I'm not interested in collateral damage. She picked up her bag. But you're going to answer for what you did. All of it. I'll fight it, he said. You know that. I have the resources to eat. Fight it, she said. That's your right. She walked to the door. I have the truth. That's mine. She was in the elevator going down when the second phone call arrived. It was Victoria. Evelyn almost didn't answer. Her thumb hovered over the decline button for 2 full seconds. 2 seconds that contained a significant amount of complicated feeling. And then she answered. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said. Her voice was rough, the specific rough of someone who had been crying intermittently for 24 hours. "Before you hear it from somewhere else." Evelyn waited. "I found something," Victoria said, "in Nathaniel's study. This morning while his lawyers were here, they were going through his files and I found something and I don't think they know I found it." "What did you find?" "There's a second account," Victoria said. "Not the foundation money. Something else. There's a company registered in Delaware that's just a name and a number, and there are transfers going into it from the development project, and the company has one signatory listed as a silent partner." "Who?" Evelyn said. Victoria took a breath. "Dad," she said. The elevator reached the lobby. Evelyn stood in it as the doors opened and didn't move. "Say that again," she said. "Gerald Whitmore is listed as a silent partner in a Delaware LLC that has been receiving distributions from Nathaniel's development project." Victoria's voice was shaking now. "I don't know what it means. I don't know if Dad knew. I don't know if he was set up or if he—" "Evelyn, I don't know what it means, but his name is on the documents, and if the DA finds this before we figure out what—" "Send me a photo of every document you found," Evelyn said. Her own voice was steady, which was notable because nothing else was. "Right now, before you touch anything else. Before you let anyone else see them. Send me photos and then put everything back exactly where it was." "Evelyn, Victoria." She stepped out of the elevator. The lobby of Nathaniel's building was all marble and quiet, the kind of building that was designed to communicate the specific message that people who worked here were not the kind of people things went wrong for. "Send me the photos. I will call you back in 10 minutes. She hung up. She stood in the lobby of Nathaniel Graves's building and understood for the first time that the shape of the problem she was dealing with was not the shape she had thought it was. She had walked into this believing she knew what the architecture of the betrayal looked like. She had thought she understood the floor plan, Nathaniel's strategy, the permits, the engagement, the fraud. She had organized her understanding of the damage and she had begun making decisions based on that understanding. But if her father's name was on those documents, if Gerald Whitmore, who she had called from the chapel 2 days ago and watched rebuild himself into someone she could trust, if he was somehow part of this, then either Nathaniel was more sophisticated than she had understood, which meant there were probably more layers she hadn't found yet, or her father had been complicit. And if her father had been complicit, then the story she had been telling herself about her family, about who knew what, about who had failed her and who had simply been blind, was wrong. And if that story was wrong, then she was standing in the middle of a disaster she could not navigate using the map she had. Her phone buzzed. Victoria's photos. She opened the first one. Her father's signature was clear and unmistakable. The Gerald Whitmore signature she had seen on foundation documents, on legal letters, on birthday cards since she was a child. And it was sitting at the bottom of a partnership agreement dated 14 months before Nathaniel had proposed to her. 14 months. Which meant it predated the engagement, which meant that when her father had stood in the Hamptons' living room and watched Nathaniel ask his daughter to marry him, Gerald Whitmore had already been in a financial partnership with the man doing the asking. Her hands were absolutely still as she scrolled through the photos. She was a woman who had always believed that knowing the truth, however brutal, was better than not knowing it. She had built her entire understanding of her own character around that belief. It was the thing that had made her good at the work she did. The ability to look at a difficult reality directly and decide what to do with it rather than managing around it. She looked at the documents. She decided. She called Alexander. "I need you to do something," she said when he answered. "And I need you not to ask me if I'm sure because I am sure, and the asking will only slow us down." A pause. "Tell me." "I need you to find out everything your people can find about a Delaware LLC within the next 2 hours before the DA's people potentially stumble onto the same documents through Nathaniel's files." She started walking toward the building's exit. "And then I need you to get me a meeting with the DA directly, not through counsel, me directly, in person, today." "Evelyn, if your father is—" "I know what it means," she said. "I need to get ahead of it before someone else defines what it means first." She pushed through the door into the cold morning air. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Alexander said. "Then do it." She walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for exactly 45 seconds. She counted, not deliberately, but her brain needed something to measure. And then she started the engine and pulled into traffic and drove, because there was nothing else to do except move forward. And the woman sitting in the second row of that chapel, holding her silence, enduring in place, that woman was not the woman driving this car. The woman driving this car had run out of patience with the version of herself that waited for other people to decide what she could handle. She was going to find out what her father knew, and she was going to find out today. And whatever the answer was, she was going to be the one who decided what happened with it. Not Alexander. Not lawyers. Not her mother, who was probably already on the phone with someone trying to arrange a version of events that preserved the family's public standing. Her. She drove toward her parents' house with the folder on the passenger seat and her grandmother's veil still sitting on her kitchen counter 12 blocks away, and somewhere behind her, in a building full of marble and quiet money, the man who had built a 3.5-year architecture of calculated access was on the phone with his lawyers trying to figure out who had found the Delaware documents first. He didn't know yet. He was about to find out. Her father was in the garden when she arrived. That was the thing that almost broke her composure before she'd even gotten out of the car. The specific, ordinary image of Gerald Whitmore standing near the rose beds in his weekend clothes, holding a pair of pruning shears, doing the thing he did on Saturday mornings when he needed to feel like a man who had control over something. He'd been gardening since before Evelyn was born. It was the one activity her mother had never managed to schedule out of his life. She sat in the car for a moment. She looked at him through the windshield. He hadn't heard her pull up yet. He was focused on the roses, moving methodically, the way he did everything, deliberate, unhurried, with the patience of a man who believed that most problems resolved themselves if you gave them sufficient time and adequate attention. Evelyn had believed that about him once. She got out of the car. He looked up at the sound of her door. His face arranged itself into something warm. And then, because he was her father and he had known her for 34 years, immediately reorganized into something else, something more careful. "Evelyn," he said. "Put those down," she said. He set the pruning shears on the garden wall without argument. She crossed the lawn toward him and stopped 4 feet away, which was close enough to see his face clearly and far enough to have a moment if she needed it. And she held up her phone with Victoria's photographs on the screen. He looked at the phone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. "Come inside," he said. "I want to do this out here," she said, "where Mom can't hear us from the kitchen." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, the same single nod he'd given her in the chapel 2 days ago, and she understood that in both cases the nod meant the same thing. Not agreement exactly, but a man acknowledging that he had arrived at a moment he had been both dreading and, on some level, expecting. "How long have you known about the LLC?" she said. "Evelyn, how long?" He looked at the roses. She let him look. She had inherited his patience, among other things, and she could stand in this garden for the rest of the morning if that was what it took. "Nathaniel came to me before he proposed," her father said. 14 months before, yes. He presented it as an investment opportunity. The development project. He explained the regulatory situation, the permit complications, and he said, Gerald stopped. His jaw worked. He said having a respected community partner on the LLC would demonstrate good faith to the review committee. "A respected community partner," Evelyn repeated. "He offered a very favorable return structure." "Dad, I know." His voice dropped. "I know how it sounds." "Did you know how he was going to solve the permit problem?" "He said he had relationships. He said..." Another stop. This one longer. "He said the Whitmore name would help reassure the regulatory people. I understood that to mean my reputation, my standing. I didn't understand it to mean..." "He used my relationships," Evelyn said. "My work. My 11 years of building the foundation's political connections. That's what he sold you on without telling you that's what it was." Her father's face did something she had never seen it do before. I was 67 years old and she had seen him cry twice, at his own mother's funeral and at Evelyn's college graduation. And he was not crying now, but his face was doing the thing that happened just before that. The thing that happened when a person understood the full dimension of something they had participated in without meaning to. "When he proposed to you," Gerald said, "I believed by that point that it was real. That whatever the original, that whatever the beginning was, it had become something genuine. Did you tell Mom? No. Does she know now? No. Evelyn exhaled through her nose. The DA's people are going through Nathaniel's files right now. They'll find the LLC documents. They'll find your signature. She watched his face. I need to know, right now, today. Did you take any distributions from that LLC? Silence. Dad. 2, he said. Over the first 8 months. I used them to fund the Foundation's medical hardship program, the one you started 3 years ago. He looked at her directly for the first time. I put the money into the Foundation, Evelyn. I wasn't taking it for personal use. She stood very still. She processed this. That doesn't make it legal, she said. I know. Distributions from an LLC with a pending regulatory investigation connected to it. I know. His voice was raw. I know what it is. She turned away from him and walked 4 steps to the garden wall and stood there with her hands on the stone and her back to him for a moment. The stone was cold. It was the specific cold of early autumn in New York, the kind that hadn't decided yet whether it was seasonal or permanent. She needed a lawyer. Not Alexander's lawyer, her own lawyer. Someone whose allegiance was to Evelyn Whitmore and no one else. She turned back around. I need you to call Daniel Marsh, she said. Daniel Marsh was a man she'd gone to college with who was now one of the better white-collar defense attorneys in the city. Today, not tomorrow, in the next 2 hours. You tell him everything. The LLC, the signatures, the distributions, everything. You tell him before anyone else comes to you. Her father nodded. And you tell Mom, she said. Today, before I do. He flinched slightly. Today, Dad. Yes, he said. She picked up her phone and walked back toward the car, and she had reached the edge of the garden when he called after her. Evelyn. She stopped. Didn't turn. I'm sorry, he said. She stood there for a moment with the cold stone path under her feet and the sound of her father's voice behind her. Genuinely sorry, she believed that. She had enough left in her to believe that. And she said, without turning, I know you are. She got in the car. Hotem. Alexander's office occupied the top 2 floors of a building in Midtown that had no signage and required a card key for the elevator. Evelyn had been here once before, 3 years ago, for a meeting about a foundation donation that had ended up being the largest single gift the Whitmore Foundation had ever received. She remembered noticing, that day, that the office smelled like old wood and cold air and contained almost no personal items. No photographs, no awards, no accumulated evidence of a life. Just clean surfaces and very good furniture and the specific quality of a space that was organized around function rather than impression. It looked the same now. Alexander was standing at the window when she came in. She noted that they had both spent a significant portion of the last 24 hours standing at windows, and filed that observation away as something that could become absurd if she let it. Rachel Cho was at the table with a laptop and 2 other people Evelyn didn't recognize. Your father, Alexander said without turning from the window. It wasn't a question. He's calling Daniel Marsh in the next 2 hours, she said. Full disclosure, he'll cooperate. Good. The distributions went into the Foundation's medical hardship program, she said. He wasn't pocketing it. That matters legally. It matters, Rachel said from the table. It's not a solution, but it matters. Evelyn sat down across from Rachel. What does the DA's office have? Rachel pulled up something on her laptop and turned it to face Evelyn. They pulled Nathaniel's financial files this morning pursuant to the fraud charges. The Delaware LLC came up in the first pass. They'll connect it to your father's signature within... She glanced at one of the people beside her, a young man in a dark sweater who looked like he hadn't slept in longer than anyone in this room. How long? 2-3 hours, the young man said. Which means we need your father's attorney to reach the DA before they do, Rachel said. Which means... I know what it means, Evelyn said. She was already dialing. The next 4 hours were the most logistically brutal of Evelyn's life, and she had organized a family foundation through 2 recessions and a pandemic, so the bar was not low. Daniel Marsh got on a call within 40 minutes. He was sharp and fast and didn't waste time expressing sympathy, which Evelyn appreciated. He was on the phone with the DA's office within the hour. Her father arrived at Marsh's office at 2 p.m. with a full accounting of everything: dates, amounts, the nature of the distributions, the LLC structure, his understanding of the arrangement at the time of signing. Nathaniel's legal team pushed back. They pushed back hard. By 4 p.m., Evelyn was sitting in a conference room at the DA's office with Rachel on one side and a deputy district attorney named Sandra Okafor on the other, and the room had that particular tension that DA conference rooms always had. The fluorescent overhead light that was too bright for comfort, the table that was too big for the number of people in the room, the general atmosphere of a space where the truth was expected to show up and perform. Sandra Okafor was 51, with close-cut natural hair and the practiced stillness of a woman who had spent 20 years listening to people tell her things and deciding what to do with them. She had a legal pad in front of her, and she was writing on it as Evelyn talked, not looking up, which Evelyn found she preferred to the alternative. "Miss Whitmore," Okafor said, when Evelyn finished laying out the full timeline, "I want to make sure I understand the sequence correctly. Your position is that the engagement itself was initiated as a component of a strategy to access your professional relationships, and that the document fraud was a subsequent element, not the original. The document fraud was to cover up the arrangement after Victoria entered the picture," Evelyn said. "He needed to run the wedding without me questioning why my foundation resources were being used. The fraud was damage control." Okafor made a note. "And the permit expediting. Alan Prentice acted in good faith," Evelyn said. "I'm prepared to say that on record. He had no way of knowing the nature of Nathaniel's relationship to my foundation connections, and the review he expedited was within his authority." She paused. "I'm not interested in Prentice. And your father?" "My father made a serious error in judgment when he signed on as a silent partner without full disclosure to our board," Evelyn said. "He used distributions from the LLC to fund a legitimate foundation program, which I can document. He has retained counsel and is cooperating fully. He was also a target of manipulation." She kept her eyes on Okafor's pen moving across the legal pad. "I'm asking you to take that into account." "I'll take it into account," Okafor said, which meant nothing definitive but was something. "Nathaniel Graves used my family's infrastructure for 3.5 years, Evelyn said. "He used our charitable connections, our regulatory relationships, our financial resources, and my personal credibility. He forged my signature on legal documents. He entered my home without authorization and took a personal item." She paused. "I want the full scope of what he did to be on record, not just the fraud, the full scope." Okafor looked up from her legal pad for the first time. She looked at Evelyn with the evaluating quality of a person deciding whether to say something. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "you understand that a trial, a full trial, not a settlement, will take a significant amount of time and will put a significant amount of your personal life into the public record." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Your family's finances, your father's involvement, your relationship history with the defendant. Yes." "It will not be quiet." "I know." Evelyn looked at her steadily. "I've been quiet. I've been quiet for 3 months while this man used my name to build his future, and everyone around me told me that staying quiet was the strongest thing I could do." She kept her voice even. "I'm done with quiet." Okafor held her gaze for a moment. Then she wrote something on the legal pad and turned to the associate beside her and said, "Let's go through the permit documentation." Nathaniel's counteroffensive came at 7 that evening. Evelyn was back at Alexander's office when Rachel got the call. Nathaniel's legal team had filed a motion claiming the financial arrangements with Gerald Whitmore constituted evidence of a pre-existing conspiracy to misrepresent the foundation's funding sources, and that Evelyn's complaint was therefore compromised by her own family's participation in the LLC. It was an aggressive move. It was also, Rachel said, with the specific tone of someone delivering good and bad news simultaneously, not without some merit. "He's going to try to make your father the story," Rachel said. "Redirect the narrative from his fraud to Gerald's involvement. Make it look like the whole thing was a family operation that fell apart over personal relationships." Evelyn was standing at the window again. She was thinking about the specific quality of a man who, when cornered, looked for the weakest point in the opposing structure and pushed on it. Her father was the weakest point. She turned around. "What does he need for that strategy to work?" she said. Rachel and the young man in the dark sweater exchanged a look. "He needs to create reasonable doubt about the timeline," Rachel said carefully. "Specifically, he needs to establish that Gerald Whitmore had full knowledge of the regulatory strategy from the beginning. If he can show that your father understood exactly what the Whitmore Foundation relationships were being used for, then it looks like they were in it together from the start, Evelyn said. Yes. And the engagement becomes a private matter between consenting adults that happen to coincide with a legitimate business partnership between families. Rachel's voice was dry with professional precision. It's not a winning argument, but it's enough to complicate the prosecution's narrative. Alexander spoke from across the room. He'd been quiet for the last hour, which she'd noticed and respected. He had the quality of understanding when presence was more useful than contribution. There's a way to close it, he said. Evelyn looked at him. Conrad Speltz, he said. Nathaniel's original business partner, the one from the pre-meeting communications. He's been quiet so far because his name doesn't appear in the DA's initial filing. Alexander came away from the wall he'd been leaning against. But Speltz was in the room for the original strategy conversation. He was on those communications. And he and Nathaniel have had a complicated relationship for the past 18 months. Complicated how? Evelyn said. Nathaniel cut him out of the development project's profit structure 14 months ago, Alexander said. Right around the time the permits came through and the project looked viable, Speltz received a buyout. He signed an NDA. Evelyn processed this. He's angry, she said. He's been angry for 14 months, Alexander said. He just hasn't had a reason to say anything that outweighed the NDA risk. And now? Now Nathaniel's legal team is filing motions that are going to bring Speltz's name into the public record regardless, Alexander said. Whether he talks or not, his connection to this is going to surface, which means his NDA protection disappears, and he's going to have to decide whether he wants to be the person who stayed quiet while Nathaniel rebuilt the narrative, or the person who controlled his own version, Evelyn said. Yes. She thought about Conrad Speltz, a man she'd never met, who had been in a room where her name was discussed as a strategic resource before she'd ever laid eyes on Nathaniel Graves. A man who had watched the entire 3.5-year operation from a front-row seat and then been cut out of the profits when his usefulness ended. Can you get him to talk? She said. Alexander looked at her with the particular steadiness she had come to recognize as his version of complete confidence. Yes, he said. Then do it. Speltz came in the following morning. He was shorter than Evelyn expected. She hadn't known what she expected. She had constructed no image of him, but whatever she'd imagined, it was taller than this. He was 60, with the look of a man who had spent years being competent in rooms that credited other people for the results. He sat across from Evelyn, Rachel, and the young man in the dark sweater in a conference room 3 floors below Alexander's main office, and he had his own attorney beside him, and he looked at Evelyn with the expression of a man who was deciding something. She let him decide. I want full immunity from any civil action related to the LLC, his attorney said. We're not in a position to offer, Rachel started. We'll recommend it to the DA, Evelyn said. Rachel looked at her. We'll recommend it, Evelyn said again, looking at Rachel clearly. Make the call. Rachel made the call. It took 40 minutes. Sandra Okafor agreed to a limited immunity arrangement contingent on Speltz's cooperation and the substance of his testimony. Speltz talked for 3 hours. He confirmed the pre-gala strategy meeting. He confirmed that Evelyn had been identified by name as the access point. He confirmed that Nathaniel had described the engagement as the mechanism to maintain long-term access. He confirmed the permit strategy, the relationship with Prentice, the calculated use of the Whitmore Foundation's political connections. And then he said something that hadn't been in any of the documents. He had a secondary plan, Speltz said, after the permits cleared. He was already building the next project, a second development, larger, further north. And the access he needed for that one was different. He needed a longer-term anchor, foundation board position, ideally. Or a marriage that gave him legal standing in the Whitmore family structure. Rachel stopped typing. Evelyn looked at Speltz. He was going to marry me, she said. Not because the strategy ran out, because the next phase required it. That was the plan as of about 22 months ago, Speltz said. He had the grace to hold her gaze while he said it. Whether that changed, whether what you had together changed for him personally, I can't tell you. By the time he told me about Victoria, I was already being pushed out. I don't know what was real for him by the end. The room was very quiet. Evelyn exhaled. She looked at her hands on the table. Her hands were still. She was deeply tired. The specific deep tired of a person who has been processing at full capacity for 72 consecutive hours and whose body has started sending politely urgent memos about the situation. But her hands were still. "Thank you," she said to Speltz. He nodded once, then he looked away. The press got the story at 4 p.m. Not through a leak, through a statement that Evelyn wrote herself in Marsh's office, with Marsh beside her and Alexander standing at the window doing the window thing again, and Rachel on the phone with the DA's office, making sure the public statement and the legal timeline were properly sequenced. The statement was 12 sentences long. She had written it in less than 20 minutes because she had been composing it in her head for 3 days. She did not use the word victim. She did not describe herself as wronged or deceived or any other passive construction that would center Nathaniel's agency over her own. She described what happened with the directness of a woman who had decided that the way you told a story was part of the story. She named the fraud. She named the forgery. She named the permit manipulation and the strategic use of her family's charitable infrastructure. She named her father's error of judgment and his full cooperation with investigators. She did not editorialize. She did not perform grief or anger. She said, in the last sentence, "The Whitmore Foundation exists to help people facing hardship, and its resources will never again be used to serve anyone's personal agenda, including anyone in my own family." By 5 p.m., it was everywhere. By 7 p.m., Nathaniel's investment partners had issued a statement of their own, the dry, careful language of institutional bodies managing exposure, announcing a review of their relationship with his development company. By 9 p.m., Evelyn was back in her apartment. She sat on her couch. She ate half a container of leftover soup that she found in her refrigerator. She was so tired she could feel it in the specific way that exhaustion eventually stops being a sensation and becomes a kind of texture. Everything slightly blunted, slightly far away, the body running on what it has left and not being dramatic about it. Her phone had been going for hours. She had responded to her father. He was okay. Marsh had managed the initial DA conversation well. She had responded to Victoria, briefly. She had not responded to the 37 other messages from various people who wanted a comment or a conversation or some piece of what was happening. She had responded to Alexander's single message, which said only, "The Speltz testimony is now formally on record. It closes the timeline gap." She had written back, "I know, thank you." He had written, "How are you?" Not a question mark, just the words. She had written back, "Tired." He had written, "That makes sense." She appreciated that he hadn't tried to fill it with anything larger. She was sitting on the couch with her eyes closed when her phone rang. Not a message, a call. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, and then something made her answer. "Miss Whitmore." A man's voice. Formal, guarded. "Yes." "My name is Alan Prentice," the voice said. She opened her eyes. The city council member. The man whose relationship she'd built over years without knowing it was being cataloged as a strategic resource. She had spoken in the DA's office about his good faith, his innocence, his lack of culpability. She had meant every word, and she had wondered since then whether he would ever call. "Mr. Prentice," she said. "I want you to know," he said, "that I've instructed my office to cooperate fully with any investigation related to the permit review. Full documentation, full communication records, full transparency." A pause. "I don't believe I did anything improper, but I believe I was used, and I believe the way I was used was connected to trust that you extended to me in good faith. I wanted to—" He stopped. "I wanted to say that I'm sorry. For whatever part I played in this, without knowing I was playing it." She sat with that for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said. "I meant what I said. I don't believe you acted improperly. Thank you." Another pause. "Your statement today was—" He seemed to be choosing words carefully. "It was honest in a way that a lot of people in your position would not have been." "I don't have a lot of patience left for managing appearances," she said. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close to one. "No, I imagine not." And then, before he hung up, the Foundation's work over the years. The Youth Literacy Program, the Medical Hardship Fund. I've seen those programs work in real people's lives. Whatever else has happened, that work is real. I wanted you to know that too." She said goodnight. She set the phone down. She sat in her apartment in the quiet of a city that was still doing its loud and indifferent thing outside her windows, and she thought about what it meant to have built something real on top of something false, to have created genuine good in the world using resources that were also being used for something corrupt. And she thought that reality was usually like that, which didn't make it comfortable but made it survivable. Her phone lit up again. This time, it was a name she recognized immediately. Nathaniel. She stared at it. The call rang 5 times and went to voicemail. She picked up the phone and listened. His voice on the message was not the voice of the man who had tried to manage her in his office. It was something raw, stripped of the practiced control she'd spent 3.5 years taking for intimacy. "I heard the statement," he said. "I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you don't need anything I have to say." A pause. She could hear him breathing, unsteady, the specific unsteady of a man sitting in a room alone at night with the full weight of what he has done finally making contact. I wanted you to know that Speltz was right about the plan and wrong about the ending. What happened between us, what I felt by the time I proposed, that wasn't strategy anymore. I know that's not useful to you. I know it doesn't fix anything." Another pause, longer. "You didn't deserve any of this, Evelyn. That's all I wanted to say." The message ended. She sat there. She sat there for a long time in the blue-gray dark of her apartment, with the city noise coming through the windows and the sound of his voice still present somehow, the specific echo of it, and she tried to figure out what she felt. The honest answer was, everything, all at once, and none of it cleanly. She was furious, she was exhausted, she was underneath all of it, in the specific particular grief of a person who has lost something they believed in. Not just the relationship, but their own reading of it, the version of themselves that had been in it, the 3.5 years of a life that could not now be entirely reclaimed or entirely discarded. And she was, against all reasonable expectation, something else too. Ready. Not healed. Not resolved. Not past it. But ready. For whatever the next part of this was. For the court battle, and the public scrutiny, and the long work of rebuilding the foundation's credibility and her own family's honesty. Ready for all of it in a way she hadn't been 72 hours ago. She deleted the voicemail. Not in anger, just in the quiet acknowledgement that some things were better released than archived. She was about to put the phone down when it rang again. Not a call this time. A message. From Rachel Cho, sent at 10:47 p.m., which told Evelyn something about the kind of hours Rachel kept when a case was live. New development. Nathaniel's legal team filed a motion tonight to have the Speltz testimony excluded on NDA grounds. They're arguing the immunity arrangement was procedurally improper. Hearing is scheduled for Thursday morning. If the motion succeeds, the timeline evidence, the pre-gala strategy meeting, the identification of Evelyn as the access point, all of it goes. The prosecution's case loses its structural foundation. Call me in the morning. Evelyn read it twice. She set the phone face down on the couch. She pressed her hands over her face. She breathed. They were trying to cut the ground out from under the case, not by disproving anything, but by eliminating the most damaging testimony on procedural grounds. It was exactly the move she would have predicted if she'd been thinking clearly enough to predict it. Nathaniel was not a man who fought fair. He was a man who fought smart, and when direct denial failed, procedural elimination was the next strategic instrument. If the Speltz testimony was excluded, the case didn't collapse, but it weakened significantly. Significantly enough that Nathaniel's legal team could make a credible argument for a reduced charge structure, possibly a civil settlement instead of criminal prosecution, possibly a managed resolution that looked like accountability without the consequences that actual accountability required. 3.5 years. A calculated engagement, a stolen veil, a forged signature on her name. And he was going to try to walk away from it on a procedural technicality. She picked up the phone. She called Alexander. He answered on the first ring, which told her he was still awake, which told her he had probably already seen Rachel's message. "I know," he said before she could speak. "Tell me you have something," she said. A pause. Not the pause of a man who doesn't have an answer. The pause of a man deciding how much of the answer to give. "There's a second set of communications," Alexander said, "between Nathaniel and Speltz from the period after the permit cleared, before Speltz was bought out. These weren't part of the original documentation because they were on a platform that required a separate retrieval process. He paused again. They're explicit. About the engagement strategy, the long-term plan, all of it. They're also independent of anything Speltz said in his testimony. They exist in Nathaniel's own records, not Speltz's account of events. Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. If those communications go to the DA, she said, the Speltz testimony becomes corroborating evidence rather than the structural foundation. Yes, Alexander said, which means even if the motion succeeds and the testimony is excluded, the case doesn't lose its core. Where are the communications? Another pause. That, Alexander said carefully, is a more complicated question. She understood what he was saying without him saying it. The retrieval process he'd mentioned had not been conventional. The communications existed, they were real, and they were in his possession, and the question of how they had been obtained was the question that determined whether they could be used or whether using them created a different kind of legal problem. Can Rachel work with them? Evelyn said. She's working on the chain of custody question right now. How long does she need? Before Thursday's hearing? Yes. A long silence. Alexander, she said. She'll have something by Wednesday night, he said. I can't promise it solves the problem completely, but it gives Okafor something to work with that isn't dependent on the Speltz immunity arrangement. Evelyn looked at the window of her apartment. The city was still out there, all 12 million indifferent people and their 12 million indifferent lives, and she was sitting on her couch at 10:50 p.m. with 3 days of legal war still ahead of her and a grandmother's veil on her kitchen counter and the specific knowledge that she had spent 3.5 years inside a plan that she had not known she was part of. Okay, she said. Evelyn, I'm okay, she said. I'm tired, but I'm okay. I know, he said. She believed him. Thursday morning, she said. Thursday morning, he said. She hung up and sat in the dark apartment and understood that this was the moment. Not the chapel, not the DA's office, not her father in the garden. This was the specific moment where the path behind her closed, and there was only the path forward. And it was going to cost her something. It was going to cost her several things, and she was going to pay every one of them because the alternative was a version of her life that she could no longer inhabit. She stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She looked at her grandmother's veil on the counter. She touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. The seed pearls, the hand stitching, 60 years of a family's understanding of what the future was supposed to look like. And she left it there and went to bed because Thursday morning was coming and she needed to be awake for it. Thursday morning arrived at 5:15 a.m. inside Evelyn's chest before it arrived anywhere else. She was awake before the alarm. She lay in the dark with her eyes open and her hands flat on the blanket, and she listened to the city doing its pre-dawn thing, the garbage truck 2 blocks east, someone's car alarm that went off and then stopped, the specific quality of urban silence that was never actually silent but had its own texture, its own grain, like a fabric that looked solid from a distance and revealed its weave up close. She had slept 4 hours. Not because she couldn't sleep longer, because her body had decided 4 hours was what the situation required and had presented her with full wakefulness at 5:15 as if to say, this is the day and this is how it begins. She showered with the water very hot, the kind of hot that crossed into discomfort and stayed there, because she needed to feel her own skin clearly. She stood under it longer than usual and breathed steam and thought about nothing specific, which was a skill she had developed in the last 10 days. The capacity to empty her mind not through meditation or any intentional practice, but through sheer exhaustion of the mental engine that kept trying to run scenarios. She dressed carefully. Navy suit. The good one. The one she'd bought 3 years ago for a foundation board presentation and had worn to 4 significant events since. Low heels. Her grandmother's pearl earrings. The small ones, the ones that didn't perform anything, that were just her grandmother's, that she wore when she needed a tether to something that predated all of this. She stood in the kitchen and drank coffee standing up and looked at the veil on the counter. She had put it there last night, deliberately, taken it out of the closet, unfolded it, and set it on the counter where she would see it this morning. She wasn't sure exactly what she had wanted from that, some kind of reminder, maybe, of the specific thing that had started all of this. The specific moment when she had understood in her body, before her mind caught up, that what was happening was not acceptable. Victoria walking down an aisle wearing 60 years of a dead woman's love for her granddaughter. The veil sat on the counter in the early morning kitchen light and said nothing. Evelyn finished the coffee, rinsed the mug, and left. Rachel was on the courthouse steps with coffee and a leather folder and the expression of a woman who had been awake since 4. "Okafor's inside," Rachel said, handing over the coffee. "She had the secondary communications for 2 hours last night and another hour this morning." "And?" "She's confident," Rachel said. "Confident enough that she restructured her entire argument last night. Holt's motion is about Speltz's testimony. Okafor is going to let her have most of it." Evelyn stopped walking. "What?" "Concede the procedural vulnerability. Don't fight the immunity arrangement." Rachel kept moving up the steps and Evelyn followed because there was no other direction. Because if the testimony goes, the secondary communications step in independently. And they're stronger than the testimony anyway. They're Nathaniel's own words, not Speltz's account of Nathaniel's words. There's no chain of custody argument when the communications exist in the defendant's own records. Evelyn processed this as they went through the security line. "She was always going to do this," Evelyn said. "She made the call at 2 a.m., Rachel said, after she'd read everything. "She's good." "Yes," Rachel said. "She is." The courtroom was fluorescent and functional and smelled like all courtrooms smelled. Recycled air and old paper and the specific antiseptic quality of a space that processed human disaster as a professional matter. Judge Harold Farrow was already at the bench when they entered the gallery, going through papers with the methodical patience of a man who had been doing this long enough to have made peace with the pace of it. Nathaniel was at the defense table. Evelyn took her seat in the gallery. She looked at the back of his head, the dark hair with the silver at the temples, the set of his shoulders, the specific posture of a man performing calm. And she felt almost nothing. Not numbness, not absence. Just the particular quiet that exists on the other side of a feeling you have processed to its foundation. She had felt everything about Nathaniel Graves over the preceding weeks. She had felt it in the bathroom of her apartment at 2 a.m., and in her car and parking garages, and in the shower with the water too hot. She had felt it until there was nothing left to feel except the residue, which was itself not nothing but was manageable. Patricia Holt argued the motion for 40 minutes. She was precise and relentless, and Evelyn sat in the gallery and listened to her dismantle the immunity arrangement procedural joint by joint. And she thought about how much she would have respected this woman in a different context, the specific discipline of a legal mind that found the structural weakness in anything and applied exactly the right pressure. Okafor conceded in 7 minutes. The courtroom shifted. Nathaniel's posture shifted. A fractional relaxation, something in the shoulder line. And Evelyn watched it happen and watched what came immediately after, which was Okafor laying the secondary communications on the record with the flat, precise voice of a woman who had been waiting for this moment and was not going to waste it. She read 4 excerpts. 4 excerpts from Nathaniel Graves' own messages to Conrad Speltz, in Nathaniel's own words, establishing in explicit and specific language the strategy that had preceded the gala, the identification of Evelyn by name as the access point, the characterization of the potential engagement as a mechanism for sustained access to the Whitmore Foundation's regulatory relationships, and the projected timeline for the permit approval that the access was intended to facilitate. The room was very quiet by the 3rd excerpt. By the 4th, Patricia Holt had put down her pen. Judge Farrow listened to all 4 without expression. He asked Holt if she wanted time to respond to the new materials. Holt said she needed to consult with her client. Farrow said he'd give her until 2. The hearing recessed. p.m. Nathaniel found Evelyn in the corridor. She had been expecting this. Not the specific words, but the fact of it. The inevitability of a man who was standing at the edge of a cliff that had just gotten significantly narrower coming to have a conversation before jumping or stepping back. She had positioned herself near the window that overlooked the gray courtyard precisely because it was visible from the courtroom door, and she wanted him to be able to find her without it looking like she had sought him out. He crossed the corridor and stopped at the same distance as before. 6 feet. The specific distance of 2 people who had been close and were now establishing the new geometry. He looked worse than he had in his office 3 days ago. Not physically disordered. Nathaniel would never allow himself physical disorder in public. It was too deeply against his nature. But something in the face, around the eyes, that registered the 48 hours of a man running calculations that kept coming out wrong. Patricia is recommending we explore a plea structure, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her. You knew she would. I thought it was likely, she said. Once Okafor decided to concede the immunity question. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the courtyard through the window beside her. 2 pigeons on the concrete, a dead leaf moving in an air current, the specific drab functionality of a space no one was meant to find beautiful. Full admission, he said. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation. He said each item with the quality of a man reciting a list he has memorized under duress. Full financial restitution, public consent order with specific language. He paused. I want your father's situation addressed in the sworn statement. I know what you want, she said. Can you get Okafor to agree to the statement structure? I already spoke to her this morning, Evelyn said, before the hearing. She'll agree to a sworn statement establishing that Gerald Whitmore signed the LLC documents under material misrepresentation and had no knowledge of the regulatory strategy. She watched his face. It doesn't eliminate his liability. It correctly characterizes his role. Nathaniel nodded. His jaw was tight. Spelt, he said. What about him? The immunity arrangement. If the plea goes through, the DA doesn't need Speltz's testimony anymore. He should be left alone. Nathaniel said it with the particular quality of a man who understood that protecting Speltz also protected himself from the complications that an embittered former partner with full testimonial latitude might create. She heard both layers of it. She addressed the one that mattered. I'll recommend it, she said. He looked at her directly then. Not the managed look, not the calculating look. Something underneath both of those. Something that had the specific rawness of genuine. And she had decided somewhere in the last week that she was not going to punish herself for being able to see it. The ability to see real feeling in a person who had also done real damage was not a weakness. It was just accuracy. The consent order language, he said. The specific language about the engagement, about what it was at the beginning. She waited. I need you to know, he said, that those communications, the ones Okafor read, they're from the beginning, before the gala. What they describe was accurate for that period. He stopped. It was not accurate for all of it. I know, she said. He looked at her. I know, she said again. That doesn't change what it was, but I know. She held his gaze. It goes in the record anyway, because the record needs to be complete. Whatever became real later doesn't erase what was designed at the start. He was quiet. Okay, he said. Tell Patricia to call Okafor, Evelyn said. Before 2. She turned and walked back toward Rachel, and she didn't look back, not because she was performing resolution, but because she had genuinely run out of things that required his face. The plea negotiation took the rest of the day. She spent most of it in a conference room 2 floors below the courtroom with Rachel and one of Okafor's associates, going through the consent order language line by line. This was the work she was actually good at. The granular, unglamorous labor of making language say exactly what it needed to say without equivocation or softness. She had done it for 11 years with grant agreements and foundation contracts and board resolutions. She did it now with the document that was going to put on permanent public record what Nathaniel Graves had done with her name and her work and her family's trust. The pre-gala strategy meeting was named. The date, the participants, the explicit characterization of Evelyn as the access point. The engagement as a strategic instrument was named. The language was clinical and specific and permanent. The permit manipulation was named. Alan Prentice was not named as a participant. She had been clear about that and Okafor had agreed. But the mechanism was described with enough specificity that anyone reading the document would understand exactly how it had worked. The financial fraud, the forgery, the misappropriation, all of it quantified, dated, described. By 6 p.m., the draft was complete. Rachel printed 2 copies. Evelyn read hers once through, beginning to end without stopping. She made one correction, a date in the 3rd section that was off by a week, and handed it back. It's right, she said. Nathaniel's team has the same draft, Rachel said. They're going through it now. How long? Holt said tonight, Rachel said. She wants it done before morning. Evelyn stood up. Her back ached in the specific way of a person who has been sitting in institutional chairs for 9 hours. She pressed one hand to her lower back and stood at the window. A different window, overlooking a different gray courtyard, but the same quality of air. My father, she said. Marsh called an hour ago, Rachel said. The DA accepted the sworn statement structure. Gerald's situation stays civil, not criminal. The fine is significant. The foundation audit conditions are significant, but he's not being charged. Evelyn exhaled. She had known this was likely. Marsh was good, and the case for her father's intent had always been weaker than the case for Nathaniel's. But knowing something is likely and having it confirmed occupied different places in the body. Go home, Rachel said. I'll call you when Holt comes back. I'm fine, Evelyn. Rachel's voice was not unkind, but it was firm. I've watched you for 10 days. Go home, eat something that isn't from a conference room tray, and I will call you when there's something to call about. Evelyn looked at her. You're good at this, she said. At telling people to go home? At all of it, Evelyn said. Rachel made a small noise that was not quite a laugh. Go. She ate at the restaurant around the corner from her apartment, the one she'd been going to for 7 years, where the bartender knew her order and the corner booth was usually available on weeknights. She sat in the corner booth and ate pasta and drank 1 glass of wine and sat with the specific quality of a person who has been operating at maximum capacity for 10 days and has just been given permission to stop for 90 minutes. Her phone was on the table face up. It rang at 8:47. Rachel. Holt came back, Rachel said. They're accepting the draft with 2 minor language adjustments. I'm looking at them now. They're cosmetic. Sentence structure, nothing substantive. Send them to me. She read them on her phone in the corner booth with the remains of dinner in front of her. Rachel was right. Cosmetic. Accept them, she said. Done, Rachel said. Signing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Okafor's office. Evelyn set the phone on the table. She sat in the corner booth. The restaurant was doing its normal Wednesday night things. A couple at the bar, a table of 4 near the window, the particular sound of a place that didn't know what had just happened in a conference room and didn't need to. She sat in the middle of its ordinary life and thought about nothing in particular and let the wine sit in her chest and breathed. Her phone lit up. Not a call. A message. From a number she didn't recognize, which she almost didn't open, and then opened because today was a day when unknown numbers needed to be checked. It was 6 sentences. I know you don't want contact from me. I'm not asking for anything. I want you to know I've been going through the consent order draft and I understand what I'm signing. I understand what it means to have it in the permanent record. I think it's right that it's there. That's all. She read it twice. She thought about the voicemail from the previous week. The unsteady breathing. The admission that Speltz was right about the plan and wrong about the ending. She thought about the specific impossibility of knowing, from the outside, where calculation ended and genuine feeling began in a person who had been calculating when the feeling started. She thought about the fact that she would probably never know with certainty. She deleted the message. Not in anger, not in rejection, just in the same practical acknowledgement with which she had deleted the voicemail. Some things were better released than archived, and this was one of them, and her clarity about that was itself a form of information about where she had arrived. She paid the check. She went home. Nathaniel signed at 9:03 a.m. She was not in Okafor's office when he did it. She had decided, with Rachel's support and her own clear instinct, that she did not need to witness the signing. She had made her decisions, she had shaped the document, she had put the truth on the record in the most specific language available. She did not need to watch the pen move. She spent that hour at the foundation. She sat in her office with the door open and went through the quarterly program reports, the medical hardship fund numbers, the youth literacy enrollment figures, the family support services caseload. The numbers were real. The work was real. 47 families had received direct financial assistance in the preceding quarter. 12 had been connected to medical specialists through the Foundation's partnership network. 311 children were enrolled in the literacy program across the 5 school districts they served. These things had existed alongside the fraud. They had been built using resources that were also being used for something corrupt. They were still real. She held both truths at the same time and found that she could. Donna knocked on the open door at 10. The consent order is public, Donna said. She had her tablet in her hand, the document already open. It went up on the DA's website at 9:30. Evelyn looked at her. How's the staff? She said. Processing, Donna said. Mostly okay. Marcus is angry. He's been angry since the chapel. Honestly, he took the whole thing personally. Jenna is relieved, I think. The interns are... She paused. They're taking their cues from you. Tell everyone I'm doing a brief all staff at noon, Evelyn said. 20 minutes. I'm not going to make a speech. I just want them to be able to ask questions. Donna nodded. I'll send the invite. She left. Evelyn looked at the quarterly reports for another 10 minutes. Then she closed the files, stood up, straightened her jacket, and went to make coffee for 12 people. The all-staff at noon lasted 40 minutes, which was 20 minutes longer than she'd planned because the questions were real, and she was committed to answering them honestly. Marcus, the senior program director, who was 36 and had been at the foundation for 8 years, and had the specific energy of a person who invested personally in everything he worked on, asked the question that was clearly sitting in the room for everyone. The governance restructuring, he said. The new board composition, the external oversight. How much of that is the DA's requirement, and how much is your choice? Evelyn looked at him. Both, she said. The audit conditions require specific governance changes. I'm going further than required because I think further than required is correct. She looked at the room. I ran this foundation as if my personal relationships were the foundation's infrastructure. They were functionally, for years. That made us effective in some ways and vulnerable in ways I didn't fully see. She paused. The vulnerability was exploited. But it existed before anyone exploited it. That's mine to address. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. Anyone else? She said. There were 4 more questions. She answered all of them directly. When she didn't know an answer, she said she didn't know. When an answer was uncomfortable, she gave it anyway because she had decided at some point in the preceding 2 weeks that managed truth and actual truth were not the same thing and that she was done trading in the managed version. The meeting ended. She went back to her office. At 2 p.m., she called her father. He picked up on the second ring. I saw the public record, he said. His voice was steady but low. Marsh called? Yes, an hour ago. A pause. It's done then. It's done, she said. He was quiet. She let him be quiet. She had learned over the preceding weeks to give her father the silences he needed rather than filling them, which was something she had never done as his daughter, and which was, she understood, part of the work of rebuilding something that had been built wrong the first time. Evelyn, he said, Dad. I know the statement is in the record, he said. The one about my role, the one that... He stopped. I know it doesn't clear everything. I know I still have my own situation to work through with Marsh. I know you do. But I want you to know that the distributions, the money I put into the medical hardship fund, his voice roughened slightly. I've been watching that fund help people, real people. I've been watching Donna's reports, and I know the way the money got there was wrong. I know that doesn't become right because of what was done with it, but I want you to know I wasn't... I know, Dad, she said. I know. Another silence. Come for dinner this weekend, he said. Your mother she's been cooking, which means she's processing. Evelyn almost smiled. I'll come Saturday. Good, he said. And then, the roses are coming back. Even this late in the season. It's been a strange year. She sat with that for a moment. I'll see you Saturday, she said. Well, the call she had been not quite dreading arrived at 4. Victoria. Not dreading, exactly. She had spoken to Victoria twice in the preceding week. Brief calls, checking in, the careful interim communication of 2 people navigating towards something without a map. But this call would be different. The consent order was public. Victoria had read it, or was reading it, and the reading would be its own event. Seeing on a public legal document the explicit characterization of a relationship she had believed in, a man she had genuinely loved, as a strategic instrument in a calculated plan. She answered. Victoria was quiet for a long moment after Evelyn said hello. The section about the engagement, Victoria said. Her voice was not the crying voice. It was the after-crying voice, flat, careful, slightly abraded. Yes, Evelyn said. He identified you before the gala. He planned the whole... Victoria stopped. He was with me because he ran out of plan. That's what it says. That's part of what it says, Evelyn said. It's not... She paused. Victoria, I'm not going to tell you what was real for him by the end. I don't know. I'm not sure he knows. But the beginning was what the document says the beginning was. I know, Victoria said. I've known that for weeks, honestly. Reading it on a public record is... She made a sound, brief and unsteady. It's different. Yes, Evelyn said. It is. I keep thinking about Mom calling it practical, Victoria said. Using your venue, your arrangements, and I accepted it. I didn't ask. I told myself you were fine with it because no one told me you weren't. And I knew it wasn't right to not ask. And I didn't ask anyway. You wanted what you wanted, Evelyn said. Not cruel, just true. Yes, Victoria said. I wanted what I wanted, and I found a way to not look at the cost of it. A pause. I think I've been doing that my whole life. Evelyn looked at the window of her office. The afternoon light was doing the things it did in October, low and specific, the kind that made surfaces look more real than they usually did. I know, she said. I think we learned it from the same place. Victoria was quiet. I'm sorry, she said. I know I've said it. I'm saying it again because I need to keep saying it until it means something proportionate to what happened. It's starting to mean something, Evelyn said. And that was honest. Not complete, not resolved, but honest. Okay, Victoria said, in a voice that was trying to hold itself together and mostly managing. Okay, Evelyn said back. They talked for another 20 minutes. Not about Nathaniel, not about the document, about the entry-level job Victoria was thinking about applying for at a design firm in Brooklyn. Something real, something that required her to be competent rather than decorative. About Savannah and what it had felt like to be in their grandmother's house for 2 months, and the specific comfort of a place that predated all of the damage. About the veil, briefly. I should have asked you, Victoria said, before I wore it. Even if Mom said it was fine, I should have called you. Yes, Evelyn said. You should have. Will you? Victoria stopped. I know you have it back. I just want to know it's okay. It's okay, Evelyn said. It's on my kitchen counter. On your kitchen counter. I took it out of the closet, Evelyn said. I'm not sure why. I think I just wanted to be able to see it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That sounds like you. Does it? The part of you that doesn't let things stay buried, Victoria said. The part that always needed to look at things directly. A pause. I used to find that exhausting. I know you did. I think I needed it more than I knew. Evelyn looked at the window. We'll figure it out, she said. You and me. It's going to take time, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and there are going to be moments that are harder than today, but we'll figure it out. Yeah, Victoria said. Okay. Alexander came that evening. He called ahead, which he had started doing reliably, not as a performance of consideration, but as an actual practice, because she had told him once that arriving unannounced felt like a small assertion of priority over her schedule, and he had heard that and adjusted. The adjustment had been immediate and without drama, which was itself informative. He brought food from the Vietnamese place 3 blocks from his midtown office, which she had mentioned once in passing was her preference for nights when she was too tired to make decisions. He had remembered. He carried it in without ceremony and put it on her kitchen counter, and began opening containers with the practical efficiency of a man who had decided that making himself useful was more meaningful than making himself impressive. She sat on a stool at the kitchen counter and watched him. The signing went through, she said. Rachel told me. He handed her chopsticks and a container. How do you feel? She considered the question. She considered it the way she considered everything, directly, without the reflex to soften it for another person's comfort. Like something large has ended. Not like something is over, because a lot of it still has to play out, but like the largest weight has been put down. He sat on the other stool across from her. Your father? He'll be okay, she said. It's going to be a long year for him, but he'll be okay. Victoria? She read the consent order. Evelyn ate. The food was good. She was hungrier than she'd realized. She's working through it. Alexander ate too. He didn't press for more on Victoria, which she appreciated. He had a quality of knowing which threads required more and which required the space to exist without being pulled. They ate for a few minutes in the specific, comfortable quiet that she had been surprised to find existed with him. She had expected his silences to carry weight, and they did, but not oppressively. They had a quality of intention rather than absence. He was quiet the way a person was quiet when they were genuinely present rather than thinking about something else. "I want to say something," she said. He looked at her. "You came into this situation with your own agenda," she said. "You had reasons to want Nathaniel exposed that had nothing to do with me. I'm not going to pretend I don't know that." He was quiet for a moment. "That's true. I'm not holding it against you," she said. "I'm naming it because I think naming it accurately is more respectful than pretending it wasn't a factor." She looked at him directly. "What you did in that courtroom, standing up when the officiant asked, you did it for multiple reasons. One of them was me. The others were yours." "Yes," he said. "I can work with that," she said. "I can work with complicated motivations and imperfect decisions and people who don't always get it right. What I can't work with is someone who isn't honest about what they're doing and why." She paused. "Can you be honest about that?" "I've been trying to be," he said. "Trying harder," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not offense, recognition. "Yes," he said, "trying harder." She ate another bite. "The secondary communications," she said. "The retrieval process." He was still. "I'm not asking for details," she said. "I'm saying I know it wasn't conventional. I know it came from the kind of access your organization has that most people don't. And I know that the information was accurate and essential, and I know I made the decision to use it knowing those things." She looked at him. "I'm not naive about what you are. I don't need you to be something else. I need you to not use what you are on my behalf without telling me first." He held her gaze. "That's fair," he said. "It's not a request," she said. "It's a condition." "I understand the difference," he said. She believed him. She went back to her food. After a moment, he said, "What happens with the estate?" She looked up. "You mentioned it once," he said. "Weeks ago, that you were thinking about the estate." She had mentioned it once to Rachel while Alexander was in the room. She registered that he had held on to it. "I'm converting it," she said. "The family trust has agreed. The foundation is taking over the operational use. We're turning it into a residential support center. Families dealing with medical hardship, wraparound services, short-term housing." She paused. "The ballroom that was set up for the reception is going to be the main gathering space." He was quiet for a moment. "The chapel," he said. She thought about it. I'm leaving it as it is," she said. "I'm not repurposing it. It can just be a room with good light." She paused. "The roses will stay." He looked at her with an expression she had been learning to read over the preceding weeks, the one that meant he had something to say and was deciding whether the moment called for it. "Say it," she said. "The white roses," he said. "You said you'd chosen them specifically, that they held their shape." "They do." "You chose them for yourself," he said, "and they stayed through all of it." He picked up his chopsticks again. "That seems right." She sat with that. "Yes," she said. "It does." The Whitmore Family Center held its soft opening on a cold Thursday in January. Evelyn had insisted on Thursday. No one asked her why, and she didn't explain, but it was the same day of the week as the hearing, and she wanted the day of the week to mean something different, to accumulate new associations until the old ones didn't have as much room. 30 families were on the wait list. The first family to move in was Patricia, 43, 2 children, a husband in long-term treatment, the specific deep tiredness of a person who had been doing the impossible alone for too long. She arrived on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of children's books, and she stood in the apartment on the second floor that overlooked the garden, and she held her younger daughter's hand, and she looked out at the bare January garden with the kind of look that Evelyn recognized, the look of a person who has been braced for so long that being somewhere safe feels, at first, not like relief, but like the precursor to loss. Evelyn showed her the kitchen and the program room and the case coordination office. "This is real?" Patricia said. "This is actually a real place?" "It's real," Evelyn said. Patricia pressed her lips together and nodded the way people nodded when they had used up the words. Evelyn understood. She walked back through the building afterward, through the rooms that had been emptied and rebuilt and reordered. The ballroom with its new configuration, tables, chairs, a kitchen pass-through, the bones of the old space still present but inhabited differently. The residential wing, freshly painted, smelling of clean carpet and paint and possibility. The program room where children's voices would fill the space in a few weeks when the first family arrived with kids old enough for the literacy program. She came to the chapel last. She stood in the doorway. The light was coming through the tall windows the way light always came through those windows. Low and specific, winter quality, the kind that showed the grain of things. The white garden roses on the altar were fresh. She kept them fresh. She had continued the order from the Connecticut florist because the blooms lasted and held their shape, and she had chosen them, and they were hers. She stood in the doorway and breathed. She thought about the woman who had sat in the second row. The folded hands, the composed face, the performance of endurance as a gift to people who needed her to be fine so they could be comfortable. She thought about the veil on her kitchen counter. She thought about her grandmother saying, "This is for when your time comes, sweetheart." Her time was coming. Not in the way she'd imagined it, not to the person she'd imagined, not in the context she'd spent 14 months of meticulous planning preparing for. But it was coming. She could feel the approach of it in the same way she could feel the approach of a change in season. Not the day it arrived, but the days before, when the light shifted and the air carried a different temperature and something in the body understood before the mind caught up. She was not there yet. She was in the doorway. That was okay. She turned and walked back through the building, through the ballroom and the residential wing and the program room, through the entry hall with its new signage, Whitmore Family Center, her name, her accountability, her foundation rebuilt on ground that had been properly examined, and out into the January morning. Alexander was leaning against the car. He had driven her today, which was unusual, and she had let him, which was also unusual. He looked up when she came out, and he read her face. She had been watching him learn to do that. The specific attentiveness of a man who had spent his life reading rooms and was applying that capacity to a different project. And he didn't say anything, just held the door. She got in. He drove. She looked at the estate receding in the side mirror, the old stone, the bare garden, the tall windows of the chapel catching the winter light, and she let it recede. "Where?" he said. She thought about it. "My apartment," she said. "I want to be home." He nodded and drove. She looked out the window at the winter city passing, bare trees and gray sky, and the specific functional beauty of a place that kept moving regardless of what happened inside it. She had been born in this city, and she had built her work in this city, and she had been humiliated in a chapel in Westchester, and she had put the truth on the permanent public record, and she had stood in a doorway in January and breathed, and all of it was part of the same story, the same life, the same woman who had somehow gotten from one end of the year to this morning. She reached over and put her hand on the center console, not reaching for him, just putting her hand there in the space between them, which was close enough to be an invitation and not so close as to be an assumption. After a moment, his hand came to rest beside hers. Not holding, just present. That was enough. That was, in fact, exactly enough. The veil came out of the cedar box in March. She did it alone, in her kitchen, on a Sunday morning when Alexander was not there, and her phone was face down and the city was doing its quiet Sunday thing outside the windows. She took the box from the shelf and set it on the table and sat down in front of it. She opened it. The smell of cedar and something older. The specific smell of a kept thing, a loved thing, a thing that had been stored with intention for decades. The seed pearls caught the morning light. The hand stitching along the edge was as fine as she remembered, the kind of work that required patience and a particular devotion to the detail that would never be visible from a distance. She picked it up. She held it. She wasn't going to wear it today. She wasn't going to put it on for any occasion. Not yet. Not until the occasion was real and right and chosen with the full clarity of a woman who understood what it meant and what it cost and what it was worth. Her grandmother had given it to her with the understanding that she would know when. She was getting closer to knowing when, but she was not there. She held it in the Sunday morning kitchen light, and she let herself feel, without managing or performing or enduring, what it meant to have gotten here. To have sat in the second row and kept her hands folded and then stood up. To have said, "I want the veil back," with the specific flatness of truth. To have driven to her father's garden and made him say what he knew, and to have sat across from Nathaniel and made him say what he'd done. To have walked into a courthouse on a Thursday morning and watched the truth get put on a permanent record. To have begun. Because that was what this year had been, in the end. Not a conclusion. A beginning. The rebuilding of a foundation that was being examined honestly for the first time. In her professional life, in her family, in her own understanding of what she was willing to accept as the price of belonging somewhere. She folded the veil back with the specific fold her grandmother had shown her, the fold that protected the pearls. She placed it in the cedar box. She closed the lid. She put it back on the shelf where she could see it from the kitchen table. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. A marker. A reminder of something that was hers and had always been hers, and that no one had taken permanently, because things that are truly yours come back. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened her laptop. She began.